Rise to your feet as we welcome the Prime Minister, Right Honourable David Cameron.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you, Pastor Agu, and I'd like to thank Pastor Adeboye too. Thank you, Daddy Gio. It is an honor. It is an honor to be here. And I'm proud of this festival, which started as a camp just off the Lagos Expressway and set the world alight, is now a permanent fixture here in London. And I'm delighted it's getting bigger and it's getting better every year. Now, I have to say, I don't envy the organizers of tonight. It must be like the feeding of the 5,000. Except, I can see you. You are 45,000. You must be relieved that it's just spiritual food on the menu tonight. Now, I remember when my good friend Boris Johnson came here to the Festival of Life a few years ago. He made some comments on the subject of aspiration. He said he believed in aspiration, and he looked out into this huge crowd, and he said he knew someone would be out there who would follow in his footsteps, someone who would one day become mayor of this great city of London. Well, I would go further. I believe in aspiration. I believe the only limit to someone's potential is their own ambition and talent. And I look out into this crowd and I can see someone who will hold my role and become Prime Minister of this great country.
So, who wants to go first? What are your thoughts on this video? Was it positive or was it negative? What's your impression when you saw it?
Cringe. Cringe-worthy.
Cringe. Is that positive?
Negative.
Okay. Negative cringe. Go ahead.
We said negative because we felt that he was very cheesy and he wasn't very genuine. You could see him reading from a script.
I just misunderstood his sentiment from the whole thing. I just thought, where are you going with this? What are you saying? What does that mean? Even from when people were cheering, I was like, but what does that mean? What did he say?
Just based on what you have said, when God looks at us, He looks at our intentions and our motives for doing things. And if his intention was actually meaning what he was saying, which I don't think he was, then I don't think is a positive video. It's definitely negative, because obviously his intention was to get the votes, and he will kind of like sing the Hindu tune when he's in the Hindu temple, sing the Muslim songs when he's in a Muslim temple, and then, okay, you know, he's feeding the 45,000 rather than
Do you think he was after the Christian vote, or do you think he was after a black or African or Caribbean or even Nigerian?
I think he was After both. I think it was the black Christian vote. If you want to get lots of black people, where do you go? To church. So I think it was after the black Christian vote. And I don't necessarily think it was a bad thing, because many other political leaders, Obama did it, many other political leaders go to various different cults and sects and religions. And so I think that in order for him to tap into the Christian vote, in order for him to tap into the black vote, he needed to visit the largest black Christian institution, which is Festival of Light. So I think it was fine.
The same thing too.
Yeah. Okay.
I would say he had the language, the Christian language, in the right setting. So he had the language, the Christian language for the black people, if that makes sense.
So you thought he was going more for what, black?
Not the Christian vote, but he had the Christian lingo for the black people, because that is what they associate with it.
I see.
Do you know what I'm saying? So whatever the conversation would have been, I think he would have changed his dialogue for that.
Yeah.
So not necessarily going for
he went to this Sikh temple.
Okay.
I think he was definitely out of the black vote, because, you know, like, he starts with Boris Johnson and kind of uses Boris Johnson to kind of like say, oh, you know, last time Boris Johnson was here, he said that, oh, you know, like a black person would become like the London mayor. And then he went on to say, oh, okay, I'm going to go a little bit further. I'll say that like one of you can become the prime minister. So that is, as in, that's kind of like a hidden message in that kind of,
It's more like one of you black people as opposed to one of you Christians. Okay. When I look at the audience and when this happened, it's a longer video. There was real excitement in the room. There was euphoria. There was like, hey, you know, especially when he said Daddy Gio, you know, it's like, whoa. So, do you think it worked?
I don't think it did. I think it bridged the gap. I think why they were so receptive was because, number one, he's taken it seriously enough that he needed to come to this particular institution. He could have gone to KICC, he could have gone somewhere else, you know, so he's bridged the gap between them and him, and has made them feel a lot more, okay, we are important. You know, you value us enough to come to our institution, which is why he was so well received. And it's an issue of respect as well. Black people, Africans, generally Christians, we tend to be quite respectful of authority. 2 Timothy. So I think that because he was the Prime Minister, they had to be receptive. They had to be welcoming, and you know, they felt that they had been.
Generally does value them.
Whether or not it's one of the things I said initially was whether or not it was genuine is neither here nor there, because as a Prime Minister you're going to speak to hundreds and thousands of people and it's not going to be genuine every single time. So whether it's genuine or not, it's not the issue. I think it's whether or not he achieved his objective, which was getting their attention, getting his name on their lips, starting a discussion, swaying the Labour vote to the Conservative vote. I think that was pretty much achieved.
On this specific election, right, the black churches came together and they did like a manifesto.
Oh, did they?
Yeah, they did. And one of the pastors who kind of works for Christian Concern, Pastor Ade and David Moore, like it was like pastors, politicians, and academics that put that together. They invited David Cameron, and the event was at Clapham, right? And he never turned up. He never turned up to kind of tell them what the black churches wanted.
Was the event structured around his appearance and then he didn't show up, or do you mean he just?
No, they invited all like this.
Okay.
But the other thing I was going to say is this. I had a lot of Christians, specifically, who had voted Labour for a very long time. But on that election, they voted for Conservatives. Right. And the reason is, even though Conservative wasn't quite, you know, they were more kind of like Christian than Labour in some of their views. So I think it was a very... you know, a lot of people had, the comments was like, I voted Conservative but with a very, very heavy heart. So that was some of the comments that came.
Why was their heart heavy?
Because they were, as in out of, it's like kind of picking, like every apple was rotten but one was less rotten, sort of thing. So that was the general comment, and that was a lot of people that I know who actually voted for Conservatives, but it's only because there wasn't any other alternative.
And I think it's worth mentioning as well that when the political climate, which it has been in the last few years, it's been so sort of here or there. You weren't sure like with Brexit, for example, you weren't sure where people were going to sit, then it made sense that a lot of the politicians went out of their way to target particular groups. And also in the last 5 to 6 years, we have seen a huge change in the way political activity works, especially around social media. And this came in that climate. So I think it's very, very significant. It was a recognition that actually people are on the fence about society as a whole. They're on the fence about politics for different reasons. But so we're going to need to push out even further to get particular groups, to get them to vote our way.
Is this what politics in the pulpit should look like? What's your thoughts? Should we have more of this?
I think this kind of symbolises politics in the church, how it is already, in terms of the secular, because politics is not being spoken, not politics as in a politician. It is a secular, the politics of the land is overtaking the church anyway. So I think that kind of symbolises the status quo that is already here. So yeah, but that is not what it should look like.
The problem we have here is a question on our leaders within our churches, how they view politics and how they open the door to politicians is something we all should be concerned about. And we should all be asking the question, how is it that David Cameron was able to step in his pulpit and speak, and why, and what was the motivations around it? None of us should be able to be closed off. We have to be accountable to one another as believers regarding our behaviours, especially reflecting Christ. And in this instance, I would have liked to have seen the leaders asking the questions about, is this the right way to do politics within the church? Which then aligns with what you were saying earlier.
I would have appreciated a lot more dialogue. I think it would have been a great opportunity to have sat him down and you maybe even used it as a panel session to say, you know what, this is some of the things that we have concerns about and we would appreciate if you could address it. So I don't think it was totally wrong that he came to the church, but I just think the way they could have used this, it could have been better done so that
it's not so much the issue that David Cameron has come, it's more maybe the platform he was given or the way he was given. Or somebody even mentioned the direction of the dialogue was one way, I guess. Do you feel like they got something from this? Or do you feel only David Cameron got something from this? Or maybe no one got anything from this?
No, I was actually going to mention that with the propaganda that David Cameron has just done in the church, for me, I think that for the congregation, they're so happy in the sense that, wow, you know, we have a political leader, the Prime Minister, mind you, in our church. It's almost that that joy, I feel, the congregation were jubilating that, oh, you know, this leader is in our church, and he was saying things that would catch them, and on top of that, it's like, wow, I can't believe this, and it's more, it's like it's to promote them further. Actually, for you to say, I can say that if I go to that church, we receive political leaders, we receive. I know the pastor Agu, he also interviewed Theresa May, so he's got that buy-in from the government where he can ask certain things in light of their church. So it's that prestige nature that this church have, and I think that is something they're receiving from this.
Is this what politics in the pulpit should look like? I think if you look at the Bible, right, the political system in the Bible is quite different from the political system we are in, right? So in the Bible is clearly like a theocracy, but we have like a democracy. So that kind of separates the two. And if you look at, say for instance, like in the old days when the kings were going to the wars and whatnot, they'd ask people from the pulpit, what is God saying? The prophets. And the prophets would give direction.
Yeah, I think I was going to touch on something quite similar. I think what would have been good is if maybe it was a panel discussion and if David Cameron was asking the leaders from Festival of Life, what are some of the issues that matter to your people, and how can I ensure that I at least consider your views in discussion in Parliament? If I write I don't know if it's white paper or green paper, could I have one person or a couple of you to make amendments or to look through that? Not coming on stage, because I don't know what he was actually trying to say. I really did not know what he was trying to say. I've watched it before, but there was no clear, I don't understand what he was really trying to do. I don't understand the leader's intention. I think if I was there, I would have wanted to discuss with him and say, okay, on the matter of abortion, on the matter of XYZ, what is your opinion? And do you feel that this reflects the people here that you're speaking to's opinion? And if it doesn't, how could you allow us to have a more bigger voice within Parliament? And I think that's a much better way of, if you want the central government to come to church, to have an engagement, engage with the leaders, engage with the people, because these are the people that are going to go out and vote at the end of the day, and half the people are not going to read your manifesto anyways. So really, actually, what he should have done is say his manifesto. That's what he should have done. If I was going to really stand there and not quote scripture, because I didn't see the relevance of the 45,000, you could be a prime minister. It sounded very disingenuous. And it's quite a shame, though, then the cheering. It shows you the complacency and the dilution, that we could just get excited because the prime minister is there saying we feed the 45,000.
The camera is like, yes, today is the prize. Yeah. How would we react in this room?
And I think, David Cameron showing up in this room, as far as I'm concerned, you're a fellow citizen, you've been appointed to do a job, and you work for us. That's how democracy is set up. What's happened, and this comes in the same climate, is where in the last 10 years or last 20 years you've had career politicians. And that heavily has influenced the way that we view politicians, to the point where some of them are even celebrities to get votes. So I think the church is in a powerful place to readdress the imbalance. That actually you're one of us, you're a fellow citizen in this country, and actually we will treat you with the respect in your office, but not let you go too far beyond that office into a status which you actually haven't been given.
I think that if David Cameron came into this room, I would expect that he's the Prime Minister, but I wouldn't say that I would respect him as a person. Just because he's not a man of integrity. He's shown time and time again that he'll say one thing and he goes back on it. So for me personally, I think he has lost respect from me. I don't appreciate or admire anything he says anymore because he doesn't follow through. And sadly, that's, I feel like, the reality of a lot of the politicians today.
It's kind of very good that we have Ruth in the room here today, because I was just kind of thinking of most of the conversations I've had with Ruth. And I mean, if you've ever spoken to her, one of the frustrations she has, that even with the work that she does, when she brings it to church leaders, right, they don't take it on. And I know for certain that most of the issues, say for instance, Christian Concern deals with, and maybe the issues we're discussing here, I think church is very different now. I think some of these things, okay, it's okay to look at David Cameron and say those things, but we also need to kind of check ourselves and say, okay, where do we stand on these issues? And do we really believe in what God's words says about these issues, that we're willing to even, teach them, invite people who have the knowledge to kind of empower people to speak? Do you understand? So I think, I feel that on certain issues we've been very hypocritical because our pastors don't want to address them to the congregation. They'd rather, get the tithe taking in every month and just kind of keep things cozy and rosy, rather than really, really speak about these issues. Do you understand? Yeah.
So here's a quote from a comedian who I don't really know. I just found that quote quite interesting. So it says, "I'm completely in favor of the separation of church and state. My idea is that these two institutions screw us up enough on their own, so both of them together is certain death." So the question here is, there's that age-old question, separation of church and state. What are our thoughts on this? Should the church be separated from the state? Or not? What we say? What's our position?
If in this country we do have we don't have separation, because I was having this conversation the other day actually in terms of America. They have separation of church of state, and yet we don't in this country. And I was like, oh wow, because in my view, I always viewed like Americans to be more open about their Christianity, whereas here it seems we're more secular here, but that's just my perception maybe.
Could I bring in a historical point, which is often misinterpreted in that statement, separation between church and state? The reason why that we have that idea of separation between church and state is because it came from a letter, and it was a letter that was written to a president that was basically saying, can the church be confident that the state will not undermine the conscience of its members, the church's members? So actually, the historical account of that statement was, we don't want the state getting in the affairs of the church. But what's happened, it's been reversed, and today it's about the church not getting in the affairs of the state. Wow. And that's important.
The idea behind separation of church and state is not so much that the church not influencing the state, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's not about the church influencing the state, it's about the state not interfering in the conscience of the church.
I don't think the two work together. So if I was looking at this statement, I would agree with the comedian in the sense that they don't work together anyway. To me, it's impossible to have the laws of God permeate through in our nation, in a democratic nation, mind you, which is an unreformed nation, and it's not in keeping with God's laws.
The goal is, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And so the goal, therefore, is to have people who are Christians in positions of influence that influence every sphere, sector of society, one being government. It is to have the ruler of the nation being someone who is of faith, being somebody who is a Christian and strong and be able to hear directly from God. So the goal is for the church and the state to be one, because the political leader would be somebody who is inspired by God. So that's the goal, and it's achievable.
So someone like Tony Blair, who heard from he said he heard from God, I think, when he was about to move into Iraq, and all the newspapers obviously sensationalized it. Yeah. So is that the kind of thing you're talking about? We want a believer in power?
More overarching than that. It wouldn't necessarily just be, yes, ideally it would be great to have a political leader who was a Christian, but I think in terms of, we have to go bringing it down in terms of policy and operationalizing those policies, it would be people then in position who are Christian, and then that would be the church and state mixing. So not necessarily having a whole Christian government, it would necessarily, because then this is a multi-dimensional nation, so it wouldn't be the whole government now being Christian, but it would be people in position, people in powerful, pivotal positions who were believers, and that would be the state and the church mixing. Because in my job, I'm a teacher, so I mix faith with academics, you know what I mean? So that would be faith and academics mixing by simply being there, and that's the goal, is to have people. So whether you're a medic, that's you as a Christian medic, you're bringing your medicine and your faith together because you're a medic. So if you're a politician and a Christian, that's you bringing the state and the church together, because everything you're going to be doing is influenced and informed by Christ.
So the whole idea of like the House of Lords, for example, I don't know if anyone's aware, but currently there is at least a quota that's for is it priests or bishops? Yeah, bishops. So the House of Lords has a guaranteed number of bishops within itself. Is that a good thing?
I don't think it matters what type of bishop it is. I just think one of the things that we have to be careful of is not to tar every denomination with the same brush and think that just because you're a specific denomination that you're more holy or more connected to God than any other. Anybody can have any kind of hat. I can be in the Church of England, I could be a non-denominational, I can't be a Catholic, but I could be one of the I could be any kind of, put on any kind of hat and have a really good relationship with God. It just depends on what church I go to. So me, I might class myself as a non-denominational, which I do, but I go to a Pentecostal church. So, and that's because of various different factors. Yeah. So I don't think it necessarily matters whether it's bishops or non-Church of England bishops, as long as there's a quota, and that's a set quota, and that's God saying, listen,
it's a good thing.
It's a good thing.
That the House of Lords go on roof and then go on roof.
Because, obviously, there are some amazing church. There are some, and I there are a few. I'm going to say that. But I've been in like the synod where the Church of England bishops, and it's hard to find a Christian there. There are some good ones, but I know you guys, Christian Concern, going into the synod. Andrea Williams, she stands alone, doesn't she? So many times she stands alone.
The question that's posed there, church and state, should they be separate? I think they should be together. This is the reason, right?
Should be together.
Yeah. Okay. The reason is, like, most of the nucleus of any laws, like especially in the Western democracy, they've uplifted most of those ideas from the Bible. Do you understand? And even the Magna Carta and all those, it's kind of like what influenced how they put those laws together. Secondly, even when the church was being formed in Rome, right? Part of what the politicians saw the church do was like looking after the poor, bringing the widows in, setting up hospitals. And, you know, as the church did these things and they grew, politicians kind of said, oh wow, this is a good idea, let's follow it. And also you see it in the Bible where God kind of encourages people to take up these social issues. Like, say for instance, at the moment, the church started food bank. Do you know, like, Muslims have started their own version of food bank? Hindus have started their own. That is how it should be. We should kind of like, you know, be the forerunners of what society should be like.
You said the politicians saw the good things the church were doing and then got involved. So were you referring to like Constantine?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting because he's had a big impact on how the church even. It's a bit like David Cameron coming in here and then kind of showing us how it's done. No,
but even like, say for instance, I've worked with different housing associations, right? And I can tell you that the ones that now the councils own, councils or like are independent, were started by priests. They literally started it because there was an issue of homelessness. And
well, you're suggesting that the church and the state needs to be together, or it's a good thing for it to be together to see more of that.
Right now, I think because you don't have the heart of the church in government, right? That's why there's a lot of chaos. Everything is disjointed. But when we had that, you know, like even like organizations like Boots, which now is kind of very expensive, right? Was started specifically because poor people could not afford to buy medication, so someone wanted to make them cheaper. But they've kind of veered off their original goal.
I was just going to say that church, the ecclesia, is a state in itself. So, no, the state and the church should be separate on the basis that the church is a state, it's a nation. So if you believe that you're a nation, then you will then understand that you are a government, and therefore you will act accordingly to your authority in your government. Like the Jews, to a degree, I'm sure the way they're not really impacted the way everybody else is impacted by some of the laws because of the way they structured themselves. And you know, in terms of finances, that's just a big thing, economic-wise. So because they have an understanding that they are theocracy, even like Islam, they have an understanding that they are theocracy. So they do fight back as well. They are also buffered by certain things because they have their own laws. But the Christians are the only main big religions that see themselves probably as just as a building. They would say we're the body, but then we have this discussion about church and state, but we are a state.